All right, so get ready because today we're going to do a deep dive into something you might not have heard much about. It's called HMPV, or Human Metapneumovirus.
Okay.
And you guys, our listeners, you sent in a ton of articles and reports about this virus. And let me tell you, some of this stuff is really eye-opening.
Yeah.
Like, I had no idea how common this virus is.
Right.
But you never really hear about it on the news, you know?
That's true.
It's kind of strange.
That's good.
It flies under the radar.
Yeah, HMPV often does, especially since it can look a lot like a common cold.
Right.
But, for some people, it can be a much bigger deal.
Right. Okay, so let's get right to it.
Sure.
What exactly is HMPV? Yeah. The articles mentioned something about a negative sense single-stranded RNA virus.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us?
Okay.
It sounds pretty complicated.
Okay, think of it this way. HMPV, like many viruses, carries its genetic blueprint in the form of RNA, right?
Okay.
And most of us have heard of DNA, like that double helix structure. Well, RNA is similar, but it's just a single strand, like one thread of genetic code.
Okay.
And the negative sense part.
Yeah.
That just means that the RNA needs to be converted before it can actually kind of hijack our cells and start replicating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a bit sneaky.
Sneaky is right. So this RNA virus, it's related to RSV, right?
Yes.
That's the one we always hear about with kids
exactly.
in the winter.
Yes. So both HMPV and RSV belong to the same viral family, the Pneumoviridae family, which is why they share a lot of the same symptoms.
Right.
And they're transmitted in very similar ways.
Right.
But it's super important to remember that they are distinct viruses.
Okay, so like distant cousins in the virus world.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Got it.
Yeah.
But here's where things get really interesting for me.
Okay.
The sources mention that HMPV likely evolved from a bird virus,
Right.
an avian virus.
Yes.
What are the implications of that? Like, should we be worried about more bird viruses jumping to humans?
Well, what's really interesting here is that this connection to birds, it shows us how interconnected animal and human health really are, and it emphasizes how important it is to monitor animals.
Right.
Animal populations for any potential viral threats.
Oh, okay.
And just recognizing that what happens in the animal kingdom can have a direct impact on our own health,
Wow, that's a great point. It's like a whole new dimension to public health that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we know HMPV is common, and it's got this like really interesting origin story.
Right.
Well, what does it actually do to us? The sources mention it often feels like a common cold, so could it be more serious than that?
Yeah, so you're right. HMPV does often cause mild cold-like symptoms.
Okay.
Cough, runny nose, fever, you name it, all the usual suspects.
Right.
But the thing is for certain people, it can turn into something much more serious.
Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
Who should be extra cautious?
So we're talking about anyone who's vulnerable, so infants, especially babies under 12 months old, adults over 65, and anybody with a weakened immune system.
Right.
Or any chronic respiratory conditions like asthma or COPD.
Gotcha.
And for these people, HMPV can lead to much more serious complications like bronchitis or pneumonia.
Wow.
And sometimes those people even need to be hospitalized.
That is concerning.
Yeah.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, pretending to be a harmless cold, but it could be a lot more dangerous.
It can be.
And speaking of danger, there's been a lot of news lately coming out of China about this surge in HMPV infections.
Right.
Should we be worried about that here?
Well, it's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
While, HMPV is a global virus, so it's everywhere. But any significant shift in infection patterns, like a surge, that's something we need to investigate.
Right.
And in China, they've seen a big increase in cases, especially among children. And researchers are still trying to figure out why.
Is it because they relaxed the COVID restrictions? I think I read something about that in one of the articles.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
Easing restrictions, that could contribute to increased circulation of all kinds of respiratory viruses, not just HMPV.
Right.
But, researchers are also looking into other possibilities. Like maybe there's new variants emerging, but it's really too early to say for sure.
So no need to panic, but it's good to stay informed.
Exactly.
Speaking of being informed, let's talk about how HMPV spreads.
Okay.
Is it like COVID all over again? Do we need masks and lockdowns?
Not quite. While HMPV can spread through respiratory droplets like COVID, it's mostly transmitted through close contact.
Okay.
and touching contaminated surfaces, you know, like doorknobs, shared toys, things like that.
Okay, so it's more similar to the common cold in terms of transmission.
Right.
That makes me feel a little better.
Okay.
But there's one thing that really stuck with me from the articles is that there's no specific treatment for HMPV yet. That's right.
That seems like a pretty big gap in our, medical arsenal.
It is.
Especially since it can be so serious in some cases.
You're right. It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
Currently, the way we treat HMPV is really just by managing the symptoms and supporting the body's own immune system. So, over-the-counter pain relievers, decongestants, rest. Those are usually all you need.
So basically like treating a cold, drink plenty of fluids, get some rest.
Exactly.
The best.
But for severe cases, especially in those more vulnerable groups that we talked about, sometimes people need to be hospitalized to provide more intensive care, like oxygen therapy.
Right.
Maybe even mechanical ventilation.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So while there's no cure yet, there are ways to manage the symptoms and help the body fight it off.
Right.
But what about prevention? Is there any good news on that front?
Actually, there is.
Really?
Yeah, Moderna, the company that developed the mRNA vaccine for COVID.
They're working on an mRNA vaccine for HMPV, too.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, they've completed phase I of the clinical trials, and the results are looking pretty good.
mRNA vaccines. That's really exciting. Those use genetic material, right?
Yes.
To basically teach our cells how to fight off a virus.
That's right. It's the same technology they used for the COVID vaccines, and now they're applying it to HMPV.
That's amazing.
So if these trials continue to show good results, we could actually have an effective HMPV vaccine sometime soon.
Wow, that would be great.
And that would be a real game changer, especially for those who are most at risk.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
But until then, are we kind of stuck with those good old-fashioned hygiene practices?
Pretty much.
Okay.
The CDC recommends the same precautions we've all gotten used to, frequent hand washing, avoiding close contact with people who are sick.
Right.
Covering coughs and sneezes, and staying home when you're not feeling well. These might seem simple, but they really do help in preventing the spread of HMPV and really any respiratory virus.
It's amazing how those basic steps can be so effective.
It is.
I remember a few years ago when everybody was obsessed with hand sanitizer.
Right.
And I made it through that whole winter without getting a single cold or flu.
There you go.
It really works.
It does.
Just being aware of what you're touching and how often you wash your hands, it can really make a big difference.
It can.
Okay, so to recap, HMPV, it's the sneaky virus.
Yeah.
Often disguises itself as a common cold.
Right.
But it can be a serious problem, especially for certain groups of people.
Yes.
And while there's no specific treatment yet, managing the symptoms and supporting your body's own defenses, that's key.
Exactly.
And we've got this potential mRNA vaccine on the horizon, which is amazing news.
It is.
But there's still so much more to learn.
There is.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore all the complexities of HMPV treatment.
Right, talk about the ongoing research, and we'll discuss what the future holds for tackling this really intriguing virus.
Sounds good.
Stay with us. Welcome back to our deep dive on HMPV.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot already.
We have.
But now I'm really curious about this whole treatment thing.
Okay.
You said there's no antiviral specifically for HMPV yet.
Right.
Which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
But I read in some of the articles that ribavirin could be a potential treatment.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
So ribavirin's an interesting one.
Okay.
It's a broad-spectrum antiviral medication. So it's been used to treat all sorts of viral infections like hepatitis C and RSV.
Right.
And some studies have shown that it might be effective against HMPV as well.
Okay.
But the evidence is still pretty limited.
So it's not a sure thing.
Not really. You know, more research needs to be done
to
see if it actually works against HMPV and to make sure it's safe.
I see.
And that's one of the tricky things about developing antivirals in general.
Yeah. Viruses are always changing. They mutate really quickly.
Right. It's like a constant battle. Like science is always trying to catch up with these tiny little microbes.
Exactly. It's an arms race.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But why is it so hard to develop a specific antiviral for HMPV? What makes it so difficult?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is that viruses, unlike bacteria, they don't have their own cellular machinery. They basically hijack our cells to replicate.
Right.
So trying to create a drug that targets the virus without harming our own cells in the process, it's really tricky.
It's like trying to defuse a bomb in a crowded room.
Exactly.
You can't make any mistakes. outbreaks.
Right.
Okay, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about the future of HMPV research.
Sure.
What are scientists really focusing on right now?
Well, there are a lot of exciting areas they're looking at.
Okay.
Developing new antivirals is definitely a top priority.
Yeah.
But they're also trying to understand the long-term effects of HMPV.
Long-term effects. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, it's important.
Okay.
We know that it causes acute respiratory illness, but now researchers are looking into whether HMPV might also be connected to more chronic conditions.
Right.
Like asthma or COPD.
Wow. So there could be these like ripple effects from the virus that we're just starting to uncover?
That's right. It's a lot more complex than we initially thought.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But let's go back to that glimmer of hope.
Okay.
That potential mRNA vaccine.
Yes.
You mentioned that Moderna has finished phase I of their clinical trials.
I did.
Can you break down what that actually means?
Sure. So phase I trials are basically the first step in testing a new vaccine in humans.
Okay.
The main goal is to figure out if it's safe.
Right.
And what the right dose is.
Okay.
So they start with a small group of volunteers and watch them really carefully to see if there are any bad reactions.
Gotcha.
So making sure the vaccine is safe.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing at this stage.
Right, of course.
And the good news is that Moderna's phase I trial for the HMPV vaccine showed some really promising results.
That's great.
The vaccine seems to be safe.
Good.
And it triggered a good immune response.
That's fantastic. So what's next? What happens now?
Well, the next step is to move on to phase II and phase III trials.
Okay.
And these trials involve a lot more people.
Right.
And the focus shifts to efficacy. So basically, how well does the vaccine actually prevent HMPV infection?
So it's a long process, but it's moving forward, which is good.
It is. It's very encouraging.
But while we're waiting for this vaccine to potentially become available, are there any other ways to prevent HMPV that are being researched right now?
Yeah, researchers are exploring a few different options, like monoclonal antibodies.
Monoclonal antibodies, aren't those being used to treat some cancers?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
They've been really promising for a bunch of different diseases, including some viral infections.
Wow. So they could be used for HMPV too?
It's possible. It's still early.
Right.
But they could definitely play a role in managing HMPV in the future.
That's really cool.
It is.
It's amazing how these scientific discoveries, like in one field, can suddenly have all these applications in totally different areas. It's like everything's connected.
It is.
But I'm curious, with all this focus on treatment and prevention, is there anything we can do right now to lower our risk of getting HMPV?
Absolutely. While we wait for these medical advancements to become available, those simple hygiene practices we talked about before, those are still really important. Washing your hands often, avoiding people who are sick, covering your coughs and sneezes, all these things, they're really effective at reducing the spread of any respiratory virus, including HMPV.
It's crazy how the most basic things can sometimes be the most powerful.
It's true.
I remember my grandma always used to tell me, wash your hands like you just chopped jalapenos and you're about to put in your contacts.
That's a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, but it makes you think.
It does.
And you definitely don't want to forget to wash your hands after chopping jalapenos.
Right.
Especially if you wear contacts.
Yeah. No, that's good advice.
So we've talked about the challenges of treatment, the exciting possibilities of mRNA vaccines and monoclonal antibodies, and the importance of just basic hygiene.
Yeah.
What else do you want listeners to take away from this part of our deep dive?
I'd say one of the key things to remember is that even though we've learned a lot about HMPV, there's still a lot of unanswered questions.
Right.
Researchers are still trying to understand a lot about this virus. But the good news is that we're making progress.
We are.
And new discoveries are happening all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
So stay tuned for the latest updates because there's always more to learn.
That's for sure. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to shift our focus and talk about what the future might hold for HMPV.
Sounds good.
We'll discuss what researchers are working on, and we'll explore some of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
Okay.
Stay with us. Okay, so we've talked about treatments and vaccines and even those monoclonal antibodies.
Right.
It seems like we're on the verge of some really big breakthroughs in how we deal with HMPV.
Yeah, I think so.
But what about the virus itself? Are there still mysteries about HMPV that scientists are trying to figure out?
Oh, absolutely. There are still a lot of unanswered questions.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest puzzles is why some people get through an HMPV infection with barely any symptoms, and others end up with these really serious complications.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that with viruses in general, Like, why does the same virus hit some people so much harder than others?
Right. It's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's actually a really complex combination of factors.
Okay, so like what kinds of things?
Well, genetics play a big role.
Okay.
Some people might just have genes that make their immune systems more vulnerable to certain viruses.
So it's like some of us are born with better defenses against these invaders than others?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Interesting.
But it's not just about genetics.
Okay.
Your overall health and your age, those are huge factors too.
Right.
If you have a weakened immune system or any other health conditions, you're naturally going to be more susceptible.
That makes sense.
And we also know that infants and older adults, they tend to have more severe reactions to respiratory viruses in general.
Right. So it's like a perfect storm of vulnerability for those groups.
Exactly.
But then you also have these perfectly healthy young adults who sometimes get really sick too. It's still kind of a mystery.
Yeah, and that's what makes virology so fascinating, right?
Yeah.
There's always something new to discover.
That's true.
And researchers are working really hard to understand all these intricacies, to figure out exactly what makes some people more susceptible to those really bad HMPV infections.
I see.
Imagine if we could identify those people in advance.
Right.
And then tailor specific prevention strategies just for them.
That would be amazing, like personalized medicine for viral infections.
Exactly. That's the goal.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these ongoing mysteries about the virus itself. But what about the bigger picture? You mentioned earlier that HMPV is a global virus, right?
It is.
Are we seeing the same kinds of trends in other parts of the world, like that surge that happened in China?
Well, the surge in China was definitely significant.
Yeah.
But we are seeing increased HMPV activity in different regions around the world.
Okay.
Which isn't really surprising because HMPV tends to follow a seasonal pattern.
Right.
It usually circulates most actively in the winter and spring.
Oh, right. Just like its cousins RSV and the flu.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this just highlights how important it is to have global surveillance and collaboration among scientists and researchers.
Right.
By sharing data and research findings. Scientists can get a much better understanding of how the virus is changing and how it's spreading.
Okay.
Which can then help inform public health strategies.
It's like a global network of virus detectives working together to stay ahead of the game.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
That's pretty reassuring.
It is.
But with all this talk about a potential pandemic, should we be really worried about HMPV on that scale?
Well, it's always good to be prepared.
Right.
But it's important to remember that HMPV isn't new.
Right.
It's been around for a long time.
Okay.
And we already know a lot about how it behaves. But like any virus, HMPV has the potential to change and adapt.
So we can't let our guard down.
Right. Ongoing monitoring is really important.
So no need to panic.
Yeah.
But stay vigilant and informed.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating and often overlooked virus, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about HMPV, how it spreads, the symptoms, the preventive measures, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and our loved ones.
I agree.
And don't underestimate those simple hygiene practices.
Right.
They really can make a huge difference.
I totally agree. It's like we've uncovered this hidden world within the world of viruses.
Yeah.
And now we have the knowledge to navigate it safely.
That's right.
Thanks for taking us on this journey. It's been really eye-opening.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
And to our listeners, stay curious and stay healthy.